my kitchen. I'm glad you could join me today. I'm going to do something a little bit different today, and that is can some meat. Now, a lot of people are reluctant to try canning meat because they're a little bit scared of the process and the safety of the process. But it is actually very safe to can meat. And a lot of people would also say, well, why would I want to? Well, look at it this way. There have been a lot of incidences of people losing power this past few months. Between storms and electrical grid issues, you never know when you might lose power. So just imagine, if you will, that you have a freezer with lots of meat inside. You have some ground beef, you have some stew meat, some chops, some steaks, whatever kind of meat, and you lose power for 2 or 3 days. Well, your meat is going to stay cold in the freezer as long as you're not opening and closing it, but it is going to defrost. So then when the power outage is over, what are you going to do with all this meat? It's not recommended that meat be refrozen, so an alternative is to actually cook it and can it. So that's what we're going to do today. So I have all of my supplies ready. Let me show you. We don't need very much in order to can meat. We do need a pressure canner. Meat products are not suitable for canning in water bath canning, so make sure you have a good pressure canner. I'll need a pot to make my broth in. I'm going to use some beef cubes to make my broth, a pan for browning the meat, and I have 6 pounds of ground beef, and of course my canning jars. So the first thing I'm going to do is wash my canning jars and get those prepared, and then I'll be right back. So now that my jars are washed, I have my canner on the stove with some water in it to get warmed up. I have a pot with 6 cups of water, and I have my pan for my meat. So I'm going to add some beef cubes to make some stock. Now the meat can be canned with water, with stock, or with tomato juice. I'm using stock because it will be a little bit more flavourful that way. It all depends on what you think you might be using it for at some point in the future. So I said I have 6 cups, so I'm going to use 6 cubes, 1 cube for each cup. So I will get those into the pot and then get those dissolved. And then I'll let that sit there until I'm ready for it, just keeping hot. So that's 2 cubes. These things are always fiddly to open. 3. 4. Of course you can adjust this, since you can use water. If you don't like the salt that's in the stock cubes, then you can certainly use less or use none. If you like more salt, you can always add a little salt. So this one doesn't want to open because I have no fingernails to get under the paper there, but we'll just keep at it until we get it. So there we go. Pick up my mess. And we'll just stir that until those cubes are dissolved. We don't want to leave any undissolved, because if we do, that will be gritty and not very pleasant when you come across it in your canned goods. So stir there and dissolve it. Almost there. And then I'll turn the heat down so that it just stays at a bare simmer. And I'll keep that spoon handy so that I can stir that again as we go through the process. So now I'm going to start browning my meat. I'll start by turning the burner on, that always helps. And we'll give that just a minute to warm up. And I'm going to get some spices out, just a little pepper and some garlic and some onion powder, just to flavor that up a little bit. I'm not going to add any salt because I am using the stock cubes for my broth. So there we go. A little heat in there yet. Wait another minute there. So now I'm going to start browning my meat. So I will do this a little at a time because there's too much meat here to fit in the pan in one go. So I'm going to do probably about a pound in each handful. And then I have a bowl that I'll put the meat in when it's browned up. So my meat is still pretty cold from the fridge. It had been frozen before I took it out of the freezer yesterday. So we might still have a little bit of frozen meat in the middle. So we'll break this up and get it brown. As you can see, I have swapped spoons here. My other spoon was a little bit flimsy for trying to break this meat up. So we'll just break this up so that it can brown. The meat does have to be brown. You can't just throw the raw meat into the jar because it will pack down too tightly. By browning the meat, it allows the liquid to get through the meat so that it can be safely preserved. So I'm going to add just a little pepper, a little onion, a little garlic, brown that up. So it doesn't have to be thoroughly cooked because it is going to be cooked during the canning process, but it just needs to be browned. So as soon as that has browned up, I can take it out and put the next batch in. Coming along nicely, almost there. So I think that is going to be done enough. We don't need to cook it to death because, as I said, it is going to cook when it is being processed in the canner. So what I'm going to do now is use my slotted spoon to take the meat out and put it in a bowl so that I can get the next load in. By using my slotted spoon, I'm reducing the amount of fat that's going to go into the finished product as well. If I get too much fat in the bottom of the pan here, I will go ahead and drain it so that it doesn't go into the jars. So now I will go ahead and get my next pound of meat in here and do the same thing again. I popped this one into the microwave a little bit on defrost so that I wouldn't have the same problem with it not wanting to break up. So there we go. So this will just be a repeat of what we just did. I'll break it up, I'll season it just a little, brown it, and then move on to the next pound of meat. So this is my last pound of meat here that I'm going to brown up. And this shouldn't take very long, it's coming along nicely. I'll season it up just a little with there's some onion, some garlic, and some pepper. Get that mixed in and till it's just browned. My bowl of meat has gotten very big. I don't even know if I'm going to fit this last pound of hamburger into the bowl, but if I can't, then I'll just leave it in the pan until I'm ready for it. So I've rearranged. I'm getting ready to start again. So just to explain what the next steps are, I'm going to be putting the meat into the jars, leaving 1 inch of headspace. Then I'm going to add some of the broth to the jars to fill up all the spaces in the meat, make sure there's no air bubbles, and making sure that I still keep 1 inch of headspace. And then I'm going to process the meat at 10 pounds of pressure for 75 minutes. If it was quart jars, I could do the same thing, but I would have to process them for 90 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let's jump right in. Now I'm going to do 3 jars at a time here. I'm hoping that will work for me. Since I didn't get all of my meat into my bowl, I'll start with what I have browned up in the pan. Scoop that into the jar. Still using my slotted spoon, that way if there is any grease in the bottom of the pan here, it kind of limits what's going to go into the jar. That's filling up quite quickly. Now I had estimated that it would take about 1 pound of hamburger for each jar. So we'll find out as we get through this process whether that's actually going to be fairly accurate or not. So let's see if I can do this without dropping it all over the place. This is going to be very quick. I think I'm going to have more than 3 jars worth here, but we'll see as we go. If I have extras, then I'll just use it in something else, or perhaps do another batch tomorrow. But it takes so long to can the meat that doing another batch is probably not going to be ideal. So let's see what we have here. Grab my little measurer, measure my headspace, and poke that down a little. That looks about right for this jar. The other two jars can get a little bit more in them. So let's try that again. A little bit of a pat down there. I'm not going to pack it too tightly because if you pack it too tightly, there won't be enough liquid moving around the meat to keep the processing safe. But you don't need any air bubbles down in there either, so kind of fill up any air bubbles. And that is looking pretty good there. So now I'm going to add the liquid. See if I can do this without making a mess. I probably can't. We all know how I like to make a mess. I should have moved this a little closer, but okay, that's okay. Let's check our measurements again. Check for air bubbles. Just slide the plastic tool down on the side of the can, pat it down, and we still have our 1 inch of headspace there. One inch there. Scant 1 inch there, so we are good. So I'm going to take my damp cloth and wipe the rims so that there's no, make sure there's no residue on the rims. And then I'll put the lids and the rings on the top and put them in the canner. Let's do 3 lids. And 3 rings. Rings on, tighten them up by hand without over cranking them. Oops. Put them in the canner. And I'll do the same with the next 3 jars. So I I ended up going to get another 2 jars. So I have 8 pints of hamburger, ground beef, from a 6-pound starting point. So I'll go ahead and get the lid on these and get them processed. So from this point, I'll follow the instructions for my canner, which is to heat it until steam starts coming from the vent. I'll let it vent for 10 minutes. I'll put my 10-pound pressure weight on the top, and then once the pressure gauge starts rocking gently, I'll begin my time. 75 minutes for 1 pint jars. For quart jars, it would be 90 minutes. So the rest is just a normal canning process. And canning meat is very safe. Just follow the instructions in the Ball canning book or some other reliable source. So now that you've seen that it's actually really pretty easy, I hope you'll give it a try. So I'm going to go ahead and let this process, and then I'll be back for a few final words. Now that our processing is complete and the pressure has equalized in the pressure cooker, I'm going to go ahead and take this product out of the canner. So I'll remove the weight. Now very carefully open this, because although the pressure has released, there will still be a lot of steam here, so I'll open the lid away from myself and do it very carefully so that the steam can release a little bit there without burning myself. So now we have our product is finished canning, and I'll very carefully take this out of the canner. So as you can see, it's still, you may be able to see this, it's still actually boiling a little bit inside the jar. So I'll go ahead and get these out. Now I did not put any vinegar in the water, so there is a little bit of mineral deposits on the jars. You can see there's a bit of a white residue on the jars. I'll be able to clean that off once they cool down. But these will need to cool down for 12 to 24 hours before I can check the seals. Usually what I do is just let them set overnight, and then the next morning I check on them. Actually, that one, I don't know if you can see, that is actually boiling away very significantly there in the jar. So I hope you can see that. So the next thing you might be wondering is how long these can keep in the jars. Most sources that I have checked say about 18 months, but with most of your canned products it'll depend a lot on the storage. So I wanted to show you a can that I have had in storage for quite some time, and I'll open that up and let you see how it looks after it's been stored. is my jar. It's been stored for actually almost 5 years now. And you'll see, let's see if I can get some more light on this. Hold on. Now you'll be able to see here that there is some fat at the top of the jar. Now that looks alarming because it looks like there's probably a good inch of fat, but that's not actually the case. We'll see when we open it that that fat is more just on the outside of the jar. So let's go ahead and open this. You can see here that they've still got a good seal on it. And when I pop this open, we should hear that seal release. So I'm hoping you'll be able to hear that. Let's see. Hear that? So let's pull that lid off and let you have a look inside the jar. So you'll see there that that is not an inch of fat at the top of the jar. So let's go ahead and just pour this into a bowl so that you can see it. There we go, I think that will work. So when we scoop this out, we'll see just a little fat along the outside edge there. I can hear my jar starting to pop. So to use this, I can just scrape that little bit of fat off there, and I'll just check here. Smells good, there's no bad smells to it. So this meat is perfectly good to use, even though it has been in storage for quite some time. So there we go, that's what it'll look like after it's been in storage for a while. So next time you're at the store and there's a good sale on meat, maybe there's a 5-pound package on sale. If you buy at least 5 pounds, you don't have to worry about not having room in your freezer for it. You can buy it, take it home and can it and have it ready to use whenever you want it. You don't even have to wait for the meat to defrost. It's ready to eat. Just heat it up, add whatever other seasonings you want with it, include it in a recipe, make tacos, lasagna, spaghetti sauce, a good hearty stew, whatever you want to use your hamburger ground beef for, it's ready on the pantry shelf. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you. Bye.